Welcome to Elevating Consciousness, the podcast that helps you discover deeper levels of truth, meaning, and wholeness. I'm your host, Artem, and our guest today is a spiritual teacher and inner work practitioner. During an intense journey of awakening and healing, she experienced long periods of altered states and even psychosis. Eventually, she was able to return to a functional state, but her experience of reality was forever transformed. Her work is greatly influenced by Carl Jung and tantric Buddhism. Everything she teaches comes from direct insight and integrates Buddhist emptiness, shadow work, tantric embodiment, archetypal and imaginal work, mysticism, and heartfulness. She's currently working on a framework for whole being awakening that integrates theory and practice and helps humans develop in a way that is holistic, inspiring, alive, and in touch with the depths of being. Rosa Lewis, welcome to the show.
Thanks. Really nice to be here.
Yeah, so I'd love to set a little bit of context. I seen your name popping up in several places and decided to explore your site. And there was so much there, from maps and frameworks, practice guides, meditations, poetry, and just like an overall support and inspiration for anyone on the spiritual path. And, there's a lot of angles we can approach this conversation from, but perhaps we can start from your own spiritual journey. Can you share what got you on the path, some of the challenges you experienced, and ultimately how it transformed your understanding of reality?
Yeah, totally. So there's actually an interesting part of the story which I don't talk about super often. And actually one of the things that kind of kickstarted the whole thing was getting a bad concussion on my head, which is sort of like speaks to the part of awakening that feels like being grounded in our physiological bodies and our like realities as animals. It's almost like it just feels like a kind of unquestionable expression of that, which is, I got a bad concussion and it just sort of suddenly reality was a bit shaken up, and a lot of stuff I'd been repressing in myself was bubbling up, like depression and different feelings, and just noticing more kind of like energetic stuff, and almost kind of like took out a bunch of my copes of how I just used to function in the world. And then had a bit of a time of, I left my job, I went traveling, I had a strange time where I was sort of like, lots of synchronicities were showing up, and I watched some Alan Watts videos and had some big energetic openings and things like that. And then by the time I kind of came back and started working again and things like that, I sort of needed a way to, I guess, deal with some of the new stuff that had been unlocked in a way that helped me kind of function back in normal life. And so it was recommended to do some shadow work therapy, and I went along not having almost no context for what it was. And it was a sort of group therapy retreat where, it's essentially designed to really dig deeply into the depths of the things that are inside you, but you don't even know are in there, and give space for the absolute kind of like full expression of them. So, if it's rage, it's like there's space for there to be real rage. If there's grief, there's like depths for the full depths of grief. And that just completely, my process I went on through that completely transformed my experience. And it gave me a kind of stream entry experience where I was like, oh, reality can just completely transform based on like relating to experiences in a certain way. Like if you hold space and love a part of you that's never been loved, that can completely reshape what you even conceive of as like relationships, good and bad, who you are, what you're doing here, like all of these things are kind of malleable. And so after that, I kind of went on a mission with shadow work in my sort of daily life. It became my practice of just like really uncovering everything and almost like bringing everything to the light, all the, just like really getting to truth and love and the meaning and sort of peeling back at all the layers of copes and things like that on the top. And that this was during a really rocky period as well. I had a lot of kind of stressful things going on. My dad died during this period, and other bits. So it was like, pressure cooker times. And then after doing this for a few years, let's say, I came across Daniel Ingram's book, Mastering the Core Teachings of the Buddha. And I'd basically always I'd done little bits here and there of meditation, and it never landed with me because it's almost like the sort of like very typical, like close your eyes and be peaceful in yourself, which, as you really get into meditation, you realize like that's not the goal, but that's the sort of like barrier that you have to get through initially. That was just like never true for me. And reading Daniel's book, one of the biggest things I took away from it was him saying, if you, practice for years and concentrate really hard, all of these strange experiences can start happening. And that's just normal and or potentially a really good sign. And I was like, oh, this is literally like the second I close my eyes, I'm in, energy territory and like realms and different things, and kind of like it's just this sort of like really intense experience. And so it took kind of understanding all of that stuff is part of it and welcome, and potentially a good sign for me to be able to dive into meditation. And then I kind of took the basic framework of meditating on the three Vipassana, meditating on the three characteristics, added that with my sort of like natural capacity for jhana, which I've had since I was like a kid, as long as I can remember. Really, I didn't really know what it was, but a capacity to kind of just like be absorbed in the energetic sensations of my body. And then combined that with this sort of shadow work process of working sort of energetically, intuitively, archetypally with the sort of shadows in us and going ever deeper. So that sort of synthesized into my main practice. And then at that point, it's everything just sort of like skyrocketed and took off, and it just started becoming sort of big spiritual experience after big spiritual experience. I'd been very interested in Jung, and the shadow work therapy is based on his kind of teachings. I'd known that Jung had consciously kind of gone into his own psychosis as part of his process and found, very important things in that. And so as my experience sort of started drifting off in that direction, I was like, oh, cool, like I'll go up and explore this. And for the first year or so of that was quite interesting and I was still fairly together. And then, on a short retreat, it sort of experience just completely disappeared off a cliff into an entirely different altered state from being human. It's almost like incomparable, the two. And that was 4 years ago now. And since then, I've kind of been in different states and phases of that process, I guess.
Yeah, it's interesting because right before we got on this call, I was reading your timeline thing, and I've read a lot of, not everything on your site, because you actually wrote a lot there. It's like a whole book you pretty much have there on your website. But I was reading the timeline thing and, talking about the concussion. And then I think we actually came across Daniel's book around the same time.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
It was like 2018. I think that was also around that time when I came across his book. And he was actually the first guest on this podcast.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
Almost 2 years ago. And, his book kind of also helped me figure out my own kind of spiritual experiences. For me, I've had like the profound experiences I had was with 5-MeO-DMT. It's a psychedelic, and it's like very ego dissolving experiences that were like very profound and and then it was like coming back to reality, and it was like, what happened? And then I was going through his maps of insight, and like, oh, that must have been a and P experience, and then there was like no going back, and kind of made sense of difficult, like dark night kind of experiences I was having. So it was really helpful. But a lot of the stuff you were writing about, like the challenges you were having, is like, yeah, it just sounds crazy. Like I can't, like I've had challenging moments and I have challenging moments in my life, but the stuff you were writing was, crazy. And you went through these prolonged periods of altered states and psychosis. Can you speak to this experience and share how you understand and think about psychosis? I think for me, it was always like I intuited, like there was intuition that psychosis and like there's a thin line between psychosis and awakening. And I think there was Joseph Campbell quote. It was like the psychotic drowns in the waters that the mystic swims in, something like that. Mm-hmm. So maybe you could speak a little bit more to like that experience and how it's different from your everyday life and how you kind of integrated that and thought about it and approached it.
Yeah, totally. I think one of the things is it's like the experience I went through it's like incomprehensible to me, even from here, even though so it's really hard to talk about. And for a long time, I was actually a bit almost like a bit mute about the experiences because it was just such a different realm that the transfer between the two was difficult. And there was a big sort of split in my experience as well, whereas there was a kind of surface level that was still operating and then a like internal level that was entirely different. And I think that this is almost one of the important things around psychosis. It's like these different realms that people can be in that are more, like showing different parts of experience. And so my feeling, my feeling around psychosis is that I can't speak to all psychosis, but the sense that, but a very strong feeling and sense that it's generally something meaningful that's coming through. And it's really a lot more like healing to be able to relate to it in that way. And almost like holding that frame is one of the differences between having a spiritual experience and having a really difficult experience. And sometimes that meaning is that the person has a huge amount of trauma. And so the thing that's coming out is kind of like very sort of like aggressive or unhelpful perspectives on the world, because it's the trauma that's in their body or in their sort of social emotional system that is trying to kind of like get out and express and heal and work through its process. But the sense of like, it's almost, I think this is one of the strongest influences from Jung, is it's almost like the way that we hold things really influences how they emerge. And so if we can kind of like hold people with the basic dignity of kind of fundamental sanity, and this thing is meaningful, and what's a sort of like healthy whole way to explore this, like through art therapy or through kind of imaginal stuff, or what's the thing that wants to get out? Why does it want to get out? Why is it being distorted? That feels really important. And then, I guess on the kind of other end of the spectrum, I've also kind of seen psychosis where it's gone off the rails in terms of someone really being a danger to themselves and others. And from that perspective, like clearly there's time and space for medication and like putting people's safety first, and kind of like modern, more like medical ways of holding it. It sort of feels like it's obviously a difficult topic with lots of different facets. But I think that sense of holding it with compassion is probably the bit that feels the most important if I had to distill.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of what you're saying is, I think James Hillman talks a lot about this. I've been reading James Hillman, and he's also a Jungian psychologist and kind of like one of like the creators of soul making, this concept of soul making. And, you know, and I know you're also familiar with a lot of Rob Burbea's stuff, and Rob Burbea was really inspired by Hillman. But I think this is essentially that this idea that Hillman had was that, you know, a lot of the pain and the struggle and things that can be seen as psychosis is like it's coming deeply from the soul. It's something that has to be expressed and worked through and worked out. And, you know, there's also this maybe the difference between a spiritual psychosis, and I don't know if there is, but I think you were writing about that too. So maybe there is this thing where it's like actually this is something that's coming from a deep spiritual process, and something else is, you know, just I don't know how to even think about those things. Maybe you could say more of how it would be different, like a spiritual psychosis and a not a spiritual psychosis.
Yeah, so I define a spiritual psychosis as something that's more kind of grounded in opening, deeper meaning, deeper connection, deep sense of, all of those sort of positive qualities. It could be kind of like a transcendental experience, or a really, really like deeply personal kind of heart of the heart sort of feeling. And then a psychosis is more about, like a closing down, an aggression, a shutting off, a disconnection. And I think that one of I think the thing I was sort of touching on earlier is it's almost like psychosis has the potential to go either way, depending on traumas, depending on environment, depending on things like that. So just sort of being aware of that and aware of like how people are treated will depend on what comes through in these sort of things.
Yeah, and another thing that comes up for me is this idea that actually like consensus reality, the way how we normally function, that's like kind of insanity. And then like awakening that's coming to sanity, you know, like this whole notion of Buddhahood, that's actually sanity, but it's almost like, you know, flipping the t-shirt inside out on reality. And I guess I'm curious if you could talk about also like what awakening means to you. I think that in your work, you speak about a lot of concepts and how you understand them, and they're kind of different than maybe what you would find in more traditional spiritual teachings.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, I like what you said about reality being insanity. I think there's a way that it's almost like one of the things is it's almost like going so far into spiritual psychosis that it's almost like going in until that's just reality or something, which I think that's another point around psychosis, is that if I went into a sort of very traditional medical environment, you know, I don't think I'd get like locked up because I'm clearly, you know, happy and healthy and safe. But there are people who would think I was insane if I kind of shared my reality. And so there's a way that it's like what reality is also a factor in kind of like how we think about these things, and being able to hold that more flexibly and openly and think about, you know, I guess different ways of experiencing the world. So that's kind of one thing. And then how to define what awakening is. I have like the most broad definition which is a bit unhelpful. This tends to be my style, to just be like really, really super broad. But really one of my definitions of awakening is just the process of things coming into awareness, just like starting, almost like the dictionary definition of starting to feel and understand new things. And then within that, you can get different parts of experience being awakened. So a really nice part is awakening to the subtle body, is just like an experience that yeah, me in my early 20s would have just been like, what? And now it's like easily one of the loudest things in my experience. And that kind of like opens up a load of richness and beauty and sensitivity and emotionality and depth and ways of relating to experience. So it's kind of like these different parts of experience that can be, awakened, and that can be almost infinite things. And yeah, is there anything else you wanted to ask around that, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is really interesting, and I'll give you some of my thoughts about what we call awakening and how like I'm thinking about it. So it seems to me, in making the definition more inclusive, like this definition is like a very inclusive definition. We risk potentially diluting what awakening means in like the spiritual sense. Because at some point, awakening can mean almost anything or like nothing at all. And then the flip side of that, right, is in making the definition more exclusive, we risk restricting or overly limiting what awakening means. And it's just like, well, this is what awakening is. And if you don't have these exact parameters, well, then you're not, that's not awakening. And it kind of like one thing that comes up, and I think I've heard people talk about this before, is this notion of being woke, right? Being woke is like being aware of social injustice. It's like coming into awareness of like the social injustice and the oppression that exists, whereas spiritual awakening to me is kind of different in the sense of, which to me, it's kind of like seeing through the sense of a solid separate self or this mind identification. And maybe that's more of like a traditional sense. So yeah, maybe you could comment on more on this, like it being too inclusive or too exclusive, and like maybe like riding through that spectrum.
Yeah, I love that. Yes, I think it's almost like it almost feels like it's my job to be inclusive. And then, so one of the things I'm doing is making an awakening course. And the form is still sort of in process. But it's kind of like, it's defined sort of 16 aspects of experience that are very key. So subtle body is one of them. Shadow work is another one. And it's almost like these different parts that are, key in a sort of holistic awakening. And then part of the course is, I guess I've created this kind of overview and inclusivity vibe, but I'm also collaborating with other teachers. There's 10 of us who are teaching different aspects of it. And then almost saying like, each of these definitions, ways of holding is important. And there's a way that if you stay in the inclusive, open, everything's equal and it's all awakening and blah, blah, blah space, that's really unproductive. So you want to be able to like narrow down and go down a rabbit hole and really get the essence of the thing. So like, I guess my equivalent was like going really far down shadow work, like getting really excited about the Vipassana, kind of like they're almost like different realms and different skills that you're building, and like really going far into that. And then that can lead you to the others, or you can become an expert or a specialist in a specific one. But it's almost then having the wisdom to hold that in the ecosystem and see that these different aspects have different features that will sort of, lead to different outcomes and impacts in the world. And that there's sort of like no one single way to do it.
Yeah, I love that you're like representing that, and just like, this is just one way of looking at it. And it's like, Rose is like playing the role of making awakening more inclusive, whereas somebody else is like being very sharp and like, this is kind of the path and like, this is the model. So I really appreciate that. And it's like, even hearing you talk right now, because I've been listening a lot to Rob Burbea, a lot of Rob Burbea stuff, but there is this flavor of, Rob talks about like developing different skills. And it's like, he would even talk about soul making as being like a very advanced practice. Mm-hmm. But then he would be like, well, for some people, they might actually start in soul making, and then like kind of it's not necessarily a linear thing, and there's so many ways to develop. that the human consciousness and all these capacities can be developed. So there's not necessarily like you start with meta, or you start with the energy body, or you start with concentration, or you start with insight and emptiness. Like there's no one right way. And I think that's a lot of what you say. Like there's all these aspects, and you can start in different, and I think you even have a quiz on your site, which is pretty cool. It's like, where's a good place for you to start and land with your journey?
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
So I'm kind of also curious if you can give an overview of this kind of whole being awakening model, and kind of what you see this holistic process of awakening being, and like you have a lot of maps on your site, which are really cool. And maybe we'll throw some of them on here as you speak, but maybe you can give kind of like a brief overview of how you see this whole being awakening process.
Yeah, totally. So almost kind of like one of the purposes of the experience I went through, it was sort of like it was almost like the threads of experience were being pulled out of me. And I went through lots of different phases of like different ways of looking at that and holding it and trying to really get to almost like the essence and what's the sort of like simplest truths of human experience, I suppose. And the kind of like clearest way to depict that was through the aspects of body, heart, mind, and soul. And it's almost the sense of, it's kind of like everything that you look at, everything that you experience, everything that comes into existence in our known universe has an aspect of sort of body, heart, mind, and soul. From a human perspective, or from a more collective perspective, those would be form, relationship, consciousness, and cosmos. So it's kind of like, the more impersonal version and the more personal version. And lots of traditions essentially kind of pick one, or it's a very, very natural human tendency to have one lens and always be looking at everything through it, and have a kind of like mental hierarchy where like lots of people in the world just think that we're primarily bodies, and consciousness kind of evolved out of a very sort of like meaty body process that has happened. And then if you go into sort of like Buddhism and Eastern traditions, they tend to think that we're actually just a mind, and everything else is like a subset of mind and consciousness. And so it's almost like very easy for humans to sort of like collapse experience in that way, and to say like, oh, this is the ultimate source. And actually what's going on is this sort of like interdependent kind of link of, oh, if we didn't have physical manifestations, there wouldn't be anything that the consciousness could kind of be processed through. And if you change the physical manifestations, like if you get a concussion or whatever, that changes the way in which the consciousness is experienced. But equally, if there wasn't some of the like magic consciousness thing, which we don't, has no sort of like physics behind it, then there would be no experience. It would just be a mechanical robot. The whole thing would just be a mechanical process. So it's almost like seeing how these different parts all play like a vital role in experience. And essentially, if you kind of like take any of them out, or create too much of a hierarchy where you say, oh, this one is the one that's the source, or it starts to like gaslight people out of their experience. Because the truth is that all those things are important and present, and creating experience and inputting into what's being felt and sensed and seen and understood. And so it's like, then it's kind of like, and then what's a helpful sort of frame, model way of relating to each of these different parts. So relating to these different parts, relating from these different parts, just like being the different parts. It's almost like how can each of these things be like full in its expression in us, be in harmony with each other? Can there be disharmony? Is that productive? It's almost like a big open sort of question and exploration from that place. So I think you mentioned some of the maps and models, and there's a sense of like one of them's based loosely on the nervous system. And there's a way that having a nervous system model of awakening is really helpful, because a lot of what experience is based on is what's in freeze in you, what's in fight flight, and what's in the kind of parasympathetic calm zone. Because anything in freeze is kind of a shadow and you can't really see it, and it shapes your experience of what reality even is. Anything in fight and flight kind of creates that very narrow, not mindful, black and white thinking, good and bad. And anything in sympathetic has a much more like, creates a state that's much more associated with awakening. It's like openness, curiosity, presence, all of those things. So that's like one example. And then, that's also maps and models from a kind of more mind perspective of like, how we look at things shapes what we see.
There's a lot there. The whole mind only or like awareness only thing. I actually want to circle back around that, because that to me is very interesting, looking at that. But there was other things. There were, you used the word tradition and hierarchy, and I think you speak a lot about power dynamics and hierarchy. And I'm wondering if you believe that it's possible to have healthy hierarchies in spirituality and spiritual communities.
I love this question. Yes, definitely. It feels a bit similar to like, is it possible to have healthy parenting or healthy schools or something? There's a way where it's almost like the format is inherently a bit restrictive. Like there's no perfect parents, there's no perfect school. But there's kind of like a full spectrum from really abusive and traumatizing right up to super supportive and kind of like setting people on their way. There's also sort of different phases. I really like the school analogy, because there's like, with spirituality, there's kind of like a level where people need basic skills in a sort of like first school kind of way, just like really basic meditation practices. And that requires a certain type of power dynamic. And then there's a sort of high school version. And then there's the kind of like university, PhD level sort of way of learning. And so, a lot of the, pretty much all the teaching that I do is sort of like PhD level. It's people who've really gone through their process and are kind of like individuating and finding their own voice and their own sort of thesis and their own, like, they're often becoming teachers or sharing things in the world. And that requires a certain type of power between teacher and student that's very different to the sort of earlier levels where there's more structure and more kind of like just being a bit more rigidity, I suppose, in the system. So it feels like being able to sort of like have those open conversations is an important part. And then I think one key part where I do like to push back is the sense of with school and with parenting, there's like a clear objective, which is that it's not the sort of the adults like prerogative to keep the child under their control and to keep them in the system, to keep them like propping up the hierarchy.
Is that true? I feel like with some parents it is all about like,
sure,
how do I control this child?
Right. Yeah. But I guess that's maybe not the like healthy outcome. You want your child to become an adult and go into the world and live their life. And yeah, that to me feels like a sort of like one healthy metric of spirituality is like, are people being trained to be kept in a system and kept to be sort of subservient to the system, or are they being kind of like, yeah, encouraged out into wholeness, into individuation, and into like their own expression in the world?
Yeah. I mean, that seems like a very, on some level, it's almost like an obvious point. It's like being a teacher, you should allow, like once the student has learned, like once you've taught them everything you could teach them, they should be able to go on their way and maybe find a new teacher. Or, I used to do some personal training. And for me, it was always like, how do I get this person to train themselves? How do I get them where they don't rely on me? Because that would be the success. Whereas I can see how in some spiritual communities and some spiritual teachers, it's like, I'm the guru and it's like, I need to have my power dynamic and you could never surpass me. That's pathological. And I guess this whole question of healthy hierarchies, it also kind of ties in with the question of expertise. And in most fields, whether it's medicine, law, or technology, we learn from teachers, those who have far more expertise and skills than us in a particular domain. And in some way, I think many of us use a similar orientation in order to learn meditation or spiritual practice. However, the difference in spirituality is that it's intensely personal and existential, and it's very difficult to like assess spiritual capacities or skills. We can watch a mathematician solve problems on a blackboard in front of us, or you could even watch a surgeon successfully complete an operation, or a carpenter build furniture, but we don't see what is happening inside of a spiritual teacher's mind or heart. So how do you think about assessing the credibility of spiritual teachers and their expertise? And how important do you think a teacher is in spiritual development or awakening? And how do we balance this kind of trust between ourselves and a teacher? I mean, there's a lot there, but.
Totally. Yeah, this is a great question. And it's like, it feels like particularly potent for me because I've come up completely outside of tradition, outside of qualifications, I'm just like a free agent. It's like just my whole experiences were, I mean, I've had these sort of like key moments of finding certain things, like some I've mentioned and many more. And, spiritual friends and people who've kind of been mentors for brief periods of time, but I've never really had like a teacher or a tradition that I was part of. It was always like the thing that I was looking for, the thing that I knew needed to come alive. I couldn't find the place that could happen. So it was almost like having to carve my own path. And and then realizing that part of that process is that there's something important that wants to be shared, and so starting to share it with people, and not being approved or kind of like signed off by anyone to do that. So that's part of it, is that it's anything that kind of then makes that process more rigid, like shuts down potential opportunity for things like that to happen. It's almost like, as someone who thrives in self-learning and self-teaching, and I guess that's the downside of any kind of like being more rigid around qualifications or how do we assess this. And then on the other side of that is that lots of people, I guess, I don't know, I guess kind of it like you say, it's like such a intimate part of people's experience that like, how do you choose who to trust to let in? And I think my sort of like short term advice to people is always really like deeply listen and check in with yourself. like spend some time actually listening to how someone speaks, what the effect is on your body, on your heart, just like taking it in. Do some journaling after you've listened to someone speak, that sort of thing, and like really listen to the depths of your being and what you're hearing from someone, because I guess people can get it wrong and trust the wrong people, but starting from the place of like you're your own source of trust on the path is good and empowering. And that's kind of like, I guess, where the main place I come from. And then I think from a more longer term perspective, I'm like dead keen on like how can people's, like, is there a way to make this more kind of based on actual attainments and actual possibilities? Like, what are those things? So is it for example, doing more scientific research into how these things affect our body and measuring that, and then like looking at it from a scientific perspective, or is that too reductive? Because I have a strong sense that all of the things that I talk about in my experience would show up pretty clearly on various like ways of measuring. But is that do you then lose the magic of the thing, which is kind of the most important thing to me, is that we're showing up in a sort of like wholehearted, in like way that is about integrity and emotions and being honest, and but then is that bit too manipulable? And like it's a very it's a question that is super interesting to me in the long term. Like, how can this be more clear, more open, more empowering for people to make choices, while also respecting the kind of like mystery and the harder to define things.
What's coming up for me with measuring is, you could probably like, right, they're already doing this kind of research where they're putting people into scanners and like long-time meditators and seeing like, oh, the default mode network is like just shuts down. I mean, they were doing something with Daniel Ingram, and like his default mode network was just shut down, and he had, the only way that he could turn on was if he like was thinking about negative things, for some period of time. And for those that don't know, the default mode network is the part of the brain that's like responsible for the self narrative and this whole sense of self. But you can't, I don't think that we've gotten to a point where, and I don't know if we'll ever will, where you could put somebody into a scanner and see their ethics light up. Like, oh, this person is very ethical. So perhaps there is a utility in the sense of like, okay, this person does have concentration ability, or they've rewired their brain in this place where they don't have like a lot of this mind identification. But you wouldn't be obviously able to check, is this person ethical? And that's more of like being in connection with them. And how do you feel inside your body? How does this person act? Trusting them a little bit and seeing how that goes. I think there's also the piece of like, well, how do you know if you could trust somebody? You trust them. Like, that's the only way. There's always a risk to it. It's just with the spiritual teacher, that risk can be really high. And
yeah, totally. Yeah, I think there's something in there's something in networks of, when you talk about trust, there's something in networks of trust where I think, for example, with the Course, that's also a sort of a feeling of like, these are people that I trust and who trust me, and we're kind of building like a loose affiliation of like, hey, these are some other places that you could go and explore these things where the content you're going to get is honest, it's straightforward, it's helpful, and that sort of like network effect of I think is important as well.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. Tying the trust to a community, and like that's kind of the word of mouth, like even when somebody's like looking for a shaman, like ayahuasca shaman, it's like, well, have you done some journeys? Like that's usually how people get referred. It's like, oh, I've had this experience with this person and I can attest to them being caring and holding space and being ethical. And that is kind of how we, establish. I think that's a useful way to establish trust.
Yeah.
So a lot of other stuff that you taught, in your teachings is, and Rob Burbea also had a lot of this stuff. So I see I keep pointing to this kind of overlap, but I think for me, he's also like one of the teachers that's impacted me a lot. And like a lot of his stuff is different and useful and kind of holistic. But in Buddhism, there is this teaching that emptiness is form and form is emptiness. And this is from the Heart Sutra. And it seems like your experience somehow contradicts this. And you kind of write that emptiness is not form.
Yeah.
So maybe you could speak about what is emptiness from your perspective and why emptiness is not form.
Yeah, totally. So emptiness, I feel like one of the definitions of emptiness is that everyone has a different definition of emptiness. So I always like to start with that. And yeah, there's like almost like 10 different ways that I've framed it and talked about it. And yeah, maybe just to summarize, it's kind of like emptiness is the part of experience that is sort of dreamlike and where things can change meaning from one second to the next, and it can also have different qualities. So like the sort of void like nature of experience is often part of emptiness, where it feels like everything's just sort of like appearing and out of the void. And the non-self aspect of experience is part of emptiness. So that could be non-self in the sense of like different ways of looking at things. There's always different ways of looking at things. Or it could be non-self in the sense of like the kind of non-duality where things can't exist without their opposite. So space can't exist without solid can't exist without space, dark can't exist without light. It's almost like if you take one away, the other thing completely disappears. And so all of these sorts of different things are swirling around in the realm of emptiness, which, it creates this sense of like kind of fluidity, changeableness, impermanence, almost like anything can be anything, everything's a dream. All of those sorts of like teachings and experiences and insights to me fall in the category of emptiness. And equally form can be understood lots of different ways, but in a sort of very basic, straightforward way, a form being like the physical nature of the universe. There's a way that form and emptiness can be it's really important to be able to distinguish them and go, form has a sort of unchangeable, like physical kind of essence to it. And that it does change, but it changes in a very different way to the more empty qualities of experience, where I can look at something one way and the next split second look at it as a completely opposite way. And there's no sort of like, and that's just very free to move in that way. Whereas in the formed world where, things like how we treat the planet, it's like that has long lasting, permanent impacts. It's kind of like this physical being that we're in, how we treat it, is impacting the way that it's manifesting. So from a really like basic level, if I was if I was a cat, if my form was that I was a cat, I wouldn't be able to have these thoughts because my brain wouldn't have the computing power for it. That's a bit silly example, but it's almost like it's almost like the form is so and the body aspect of experience, it's so obvious that people look right past it and they can't see that you know, they're deep in emptiness and they're having a meditative experience where like everything is one, or it's all the divine nature, or like everything they thought was true is no longer true, but they're still a human being in a human body, breathing, the heart's beating, the lungs are moving. And if you take that form bit out, suddenly, you know, they're dead. And that's just a completely different, but it's in a very different form to how it's being experienced now. So it's almost like respecting that very sort of like fundamental, kind of simple, form that we're in and that shapes the entirety of how experience is being experienced.
Yeah, I'm trying to process this too. So for me, emptiness is form and form is emptiness. It's a pointer to the non-dual nature of reality. But to say emptiness is form is a dualistic statement. But it does seem to me like almost like, well, to me, it seems like we kind of reify form. Like we don't see emptiness in a way. That like emptiness is difficult to perceive. It's difficult to see it. For most people, it will take a lot of kind of inner work to perceive it on a deep level. There's, even in Rob's teachings, there's, emptiness that's easy to see in like these mental constructions, like, oh, that's just a mental construction. And you could easily see that. But deeper levels, it takes really working with perception to get. So it almost feels like a lot of spiritual teachings, they're kind of like trying to reverse the human capacity to reify form and to take form as ultimately true. And then I can see how that can be if you become drunk on emptiness, or you become so in that where it's like you almost deny relative reality or deny form. So I guess that's what it seems like you're doing. It's kind of like bringing it back full circle, like bringing it back like, oh, actually, there is this element of form that can be kind of denied somehow. Maybe that's...
Yeah, so that's definitely part of it. And I think one of the things you said there was really nice. I think maybe a subtle reframe I would give is that form and emptiness are both inextricable aspects of experience. So they're kind of weaved in with each other and weaved into experience, but they're not the same thing. And I think that capacity to be able to individuate them out and go really far down an emptiness path, but also to do the same with form. There's almost like people's normal consciousness is kind of in a certain place. And I think that the form, it's almost like going really, really far into form and essence and really engaging deeply with like what's present and here in a very sincere, open-minded way. That can lead you into emptiness as well. So it's almost like becomes this more rich dance of mystery and like open exploration of what reality is, rather than I think that the way that form is emptiness is form is often used to just sort of like shut down a whole part of experience.
Yeah, like something that's been coming into my awareness is this whole this idea of sutric Buddhism and tantric Buddhism, and how sutric Buddhism is very much based on renunciation.
Yeah,
and one of your main inspirations is tantric Buddhism, and it's really about embracing everything, or like seeing everything as sacred and including everything. And I think for me, there's a lot of the threads of sutric Buddhism in my psyche, but it's very difficult to kind of, because, well, I have 2 kids, I have a family, so it's very like I can't live like a monastic. I can't, even though there's been like a lot of this kind of pull of wanting to go on longer retreat and do these things, it just, the reality of my life hasn't allowed that to work. So now coming into more Vajrayana type teachings, and even like I've been working a lot with like Mahamudra, and that's known as the householder's path. So it's very much about including all the reality and like really taking the practice off the cushion. So I kind of see those threads in your work, and I appreciate it. And I think that's also why I was kind of interested in talking to you, because I feel like I'm moving more towards this kind of Vajrayana direction.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, great. And kids, the the intense practice route, definitely hard work. I don't have kids, but
yeah,
friends who've had them, I just think respect to all parents.
Yeah, it's interesting because I was almost 2 years ago, I went to this monastery, monastic academy, and it's fairly well known in like the circles I move around, and it's a really cool place. But and just seeing like how things were done there, waking up early and chanting and having the chores and like the structure, and I was only there for 10 days. But I could see like people living like that every single day. And there is a lot of challenges with living that kind of monastic life. But then coming home and like dealing with the kids, I'm like, wow, this is also really hard. And it's like, they're like two different types of challenging ways of living life. So it's like, a part of you could be like, oh yeah, I'll go live the monastic life and it'll be so much easier. And it's like, no, there'll be like a lot of challenging things there. And there's also a lot of challenging things with having a family and living in more so in the world.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
So another Buddhist idea that you seem to push back against is dependent origination. And you contrast it with your own concept that you call interdependent origination. Can you kind of explain what dependent origination and how your concept of interdependent origination is different?
Yes. Yeah. So let's feel into. So I'm always feeling like what's just splitting hairs pointlessly, and what's kind of like the meaningful, rich thing. And I think almost like the meaningful, rich thing that I'm really trying to communicate is that I guess it's speaking to that more sutric way of approaching things with dependent origination, which is that essentially you can remove suffering through like suffering has a root cause. So there's kind of like different aspects of how that's understood and held, kind of like ways of looking that you can look at anything in any way. And yeah, what I don't want to do is to completely devalue these like tools. It's almost like putting them in a more true context. So dependent origination, like one of the things about it is it's essentially describing a kind of cause and effect model. So the 12 links, is it 12? I always forget the numbers on the list.
12 links. I don't know them all.
Yeah.
It's to me, it's I can't say I understand it, but yeah.
Right. Yeah. So the 12 links, it's almost like, if you go all the way back along the cause and effect, then you get to the cause of suffering and you can uproot it. And then it's, suffering's gone permanently. And it's like my experience is one of the biggest changes in my experience is that cause and effect and causality is very, very different in my universe. And also kind of like that's backed up with modern science around like quantum entanglement and physics and the way we relate to experience and time now, that all the kind of science is catching up as well, that like causality isn't really what we believe it to be. It's actually a lot more kind of like psychedelic and quantumly entangled and complex than that. And my experience, my sort of like immediate experience is, it's almost like the like cause and effect of things exists outside of space-time. And then it's almost like, so it's like the thing that's pulling the strings and making the things happen is a kind of, it's like a sort of meaning synchronicity being that like kind of creates the orchestra of life to unfold. And that's sort of like, for that to be experienced, it's kind of like poured into the kind of like, it can go through the motions, and we can have, one person having a conversation with another person, information being exchanged, energy being moved, things like that. It's almost like space and time is what allows that to happen. Anyway, this is a bit of a sort of side bar of the technicals behind it, but it's almost like interdependent origination is much more this kind of like, body, heart, mind, soul, like these different aspects of experience are all coming together in this moment to like weave this particular story, this emotion, this like physical manifestation of the universe in this moment, this like capacity we have to be aware and conscious of what's happening. And it's a really like rich tapestry of all those things being woven together. And you can kind of like work with it and move with it, and that's also part of the dance. But there isn't a kind of like route, if this then that, and if you do all these things then you check out to nirvana. And then it has a much more kind of like interdependent sort of way of relating to things, rather than a dependent if this then that way.
It's what I'm noticing right now is actually there's like a rainbow on your face, like the way the light is. This never happened actually in a podcast before. It just, the way the light is coming down, there's literally a rainbow, and like I've been kind of enjoying that kind of psychedelic vision while listening to your explanation of interdependent origination.
Yeah. Nice expression of insides matching outsides.
Yeah. So I guess this is an interesting point for me to explore with you is, I think you talk about how, this notion of there's this view that everything is essentially mind or awareness or consciousness. Philosophically, we could say this is idealism. So even if we think we experience a physical reality, it's just more awareness or mind stuff. Like these hands, like the only way I only know them through awareness. It seems like you kind of disagree with this view. And I guess the other question for me too, also that's kind of related to this is, you talk sometimes about mind and heart as being separate, like different things, but there's also this idea of, I'm going to say it wrong, Sita, like the mind heart. Like it being one thing. Like they're really, we could focus more on kind of the feeling stuff, or we could focus more on kind of the conceptual, more abstract parts of it. But really, it's all just mind stuff. It's, even like Rob Burbea would say, like emotions are all like just mind states. Like you can talk about them as mind states. So maybe talk about more how you don't see everything being mind or awareness. Because that's something I can't necessarily reconcile, because to me it does feel like, well, everything is kind of awareness. Like I know everything only through awareness. And to me also mind and awareness in this sense can be used interchangeably. I know sometimes people use them differently, but.
Yes. Yeah, so there's something which is there's a experience of the physical of the body, which is not through awareness. It's just the physical sensation. And this is like a thing that it takes practice to get to and realize. It's almost like the habit pathways in the mind are to experience through the mind. And then this is almost kind of like the culmination of the body path, is really being a body. And that takes a lot of work and practice. So it's almost kind of like there's a way, it's worth saying that it's almost like describing emptiness to someone who's never meditated before. They might be able to get like an intellectual understanding, but that's different to the kind of like felt understanding of how emptiness is felt and experienced. And embodiment is the same. It's like clearly everyone has a body and has the capacity to be embodied, but it takes practice to get to the place where you actually are embodied. Thing I guess I'd like to say, and I think often that people, when you're going down the mind path very strongly, that can actually take you further away from the body. And yeah, it's almost like the sort of simple way to describe it is that it's almost like if a car's about to hit you, it doesn't matter what way you look at it, that's going to happen. That thing is going to happen. And it's almost kind of like on that level, just being in the physicality of the things, sort of like the hands just being the hands. The hands are moving no matter what I think about them. The heart's beating, however, whatever's going on in my mind. There's a way of just like really being in that just very direct physical experience. And it's almost like each of those aspects of experience, body, heart, mind, soul, can be kind of like pulled out and experienced as like, their sort of like own unique aspect and view and way of experiencing the world. And linking back to, I guess, the stuff around interdependent origination, it's like they're non-dual with each other in the sense of you can sort of put them together in different ways. You can say, we're a body mind, or we're a heart mind, or we're a body soul, or all of these things, but you can also sort of individuate each of them in a meaningful way where you can't ever make all of them a subset of one in a sort of like fundamental way.
Yeah, so what other Buddhist ideas do you disagree with or see differently? We mentioned a couple.
I think it's interesting because there's as many Buddhisms as there are Buddhists is one thing. It's like everyone's doing their own version of the thing and practicing, and that will be kind of closer if you're in a really monastic controlled environment. Those people in that environment will be practicing a much more similar thing. But if you're out in the world, everyone's going to have their own unique practice. And so I think maybe those two are big ones. There's like other ones where I've offered reframes. So like different ways of holding the Brahma Viharas and the heart practices that include that much more like embodied way of being. Different ways of relating to the second area of suffering, which is to do with the idea of like compassion and self and other forgiveness and the arrow of time. So there's kind of like different ways of holding these sort of like key metaphors, which but that feels more like an evolution of from this standpoint where I am, these things, it's more meaningful to relate to these things in a certain way, rather than a kind of like disagreement, I would say. But I don't know if it's interesting to talk about either of those, or...
Yeah, if you could unpack more, if you feel called to unpack more of either of those, the Brahma Viharas or this second arrow of suffering.
Cool. Yeah,
I think else you want to say? Yeah.
Yeah, maybe just to say on the Brahma Viharas one, because I think that this sort of like grounds some of the things I've been talking about, where it can be very like intellectual, all of this stuff around like, oh, is it called this thing? Is it called this one? But there's a way that the reason it's important to include the body level and the embodiment is because like trauma, collective oppression, all of these things are really experienced and held in the body. And so, yeah, the Brahma Viharas, for example, the way of practicing, where it's almost like imagining kind of like maybe free from suffering, maybe well, maybe happy. Like that's a really lovely skill to develop. It's almost like creating positive heart-mind states around like, more heartfulness in the way that you're perceiving the world, in the way that you're wishing well for others. It has this sort of like really light, like lovely, beautiful quality to it. And then there's this more sort of like, archetypically it feels more kind of like fierce, feminine, like presence, embodied, sort of dark version of those state of, for example, compassion, where compassion's about actually like really showing up and feeling the depths of your feelings and like holding space for other people to really feel the depths of their feelings. So it's almost, rather than it being sort of like, oh, maybe free from suffering, it's like, right, tell me about your suffering. Let's be with it. Let's process some of it. Let's like do the hard work to actually kind of like feel the grief or name the difficult thing, or, and you want to have a balance of these sort of two ways of relating. It's not that like one's better and one's worse, but it's almost like, including that really embodied aspect of the heart state. So, for example, another one, equanimity would be that kind of like light, open, everything can have space and pass through. And then the sort of like more embodied version would be inclusion, where you're kind of really actually standing up and actively making space for things that are being in shadow or oppressed or excluded, and doing the work that takes to change how things are held in a way that's more inclusive. It's kind of like just that sort of subtle difference between experiencing the heart states through the heart mind and that more like embodied quality is an example of why it's important to include the body, include that part of experience in all of these concepts and the way that we're relating to what reality is, what experience is, how we're practicing.
Yeah, what I'm hearing you say is this kind of, sometimes people can do kind of meta, and I mean, there's different ways to do it, but right, the kind of, you can have the mental talk of may I be happy, may all beings be free of suffering, and you could have a visual image, holding a baby or something. But it seems like the more potent one really is to learn how to feel it in the body, to feel that tenderness, that love of like holding a child, and like, what does that feel like in the body? And eventually you could kind of let go of even the mental talk and the image and just be with the feeling. And the other thing that I'm kind of getting from your perspective on spiritual practice and even Buddhism is like, I guess Buddhism is like a very like rationalist kind of religion, like very like clean and very, very mental. And I think that's why it's attractive. It's attractive to people like me. Like I tend to be very like cognitively heavy, and just I like things to be rational and to make sense. And like, these are the steps, this is the Eightfold Path, and this is how you follow it. And even with like the Four Path model of awakening, like, and a lot of the stuff that Daniel would bring in, and just very like, oh, this is great. But then it's like this more heartful, where it's it's less clear cut and more embodied, and it gets more murky. And that's kind of the imaginal stuff too, this in between stuff that you're very, it seems like you're also very much an imaginal. I think that's the other reason that I came across your work, is because I have been exploring this notion of soul making and James Hillman and Rob Burbea's aspect. And yeah, maybe you could say a little more about this imaginal work and the role it's played in your life and how you think about how you see it. And because I think that is a really new and different perspective on Dharma that's not mentioned in traditional paths.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, totally. As you were describing that, I think I could sort of there was a sense of the one of my sort of most simple, but I think most clear models is that I have a triangle of experience, and on the bottom is body, and then heart, and then mind, and on the top is soul. And it's almost kind of like, expanding out the remit of what we're practicing with. So I guess I've talked quite a lot about the sort of heart and body bits, but equally kind of, it feels like almost beyond the rational, there's this sort of more mystical, more soulful, more like inexpressible part of experience, which feels much more the Jungian part. And it's really almost kind of like listening to the depths of being in a way that is, mystical or sort of beyond a rational understanding. And that can start from really simple, like it can still be very secular and individual, in the sense that like a simple imaginal practice connecting you with parts of your body or with parts of your emotions, and just talking to them and listening to them and letting them speak in more mysterious ways through colors and shapes and imagery and things like that. And it's like the amount of just like wisdom and richness and imagination that's in every drop of experience is really wild. So it's kind of like just noticing the details of like asking someone how their heart feels right now, and like, oh, what texture does it have, and what images come up when they feel into it. It's like everyone will start sharing this whole kind of like rich world of imagery. And clearly, it's the sort of thing that if you did it with kids, they just love and have endless imagination for. So it's clearly a kind of like inbuilt natural part of experience. And then, that can go incredibly sort of like mystical and much more sort of like breaking more kind of materialist, rational paradigms into sort of, like the depths of what reality is and how that emerges, and the meaning that's baked into things, and synchronicity, and the way that sort of like ripples through our beings. How there's a way of looking where we're all these kind of like archetypal forms that are moving through the world. Having a deeper meaning and a deeper purpose, all of these things as a kind of, so it's almost like an endless scale of richness, from like the smallest details held within quite a secular view up until like the biggest sort of cosmic movements of why we're here and what we're doing, held in a very much more mystical frame.
Yeah, I really appreciate opening up to this, to the imaginal realm, and to this idea that we're kind of swimming in imagination. I think that, like you said, for children, it's a very innate, natural part for us, imagination. But I think as we get older, it's very easy for that capacity to kind of close down. Like we're not aware of it, but it's actually always operating. Like even the rationalist scientists, like that's an imagination. Like there's an archetype there that they're functioning through. And it's like, oh, I'm rational. I'm so rational, and I'm figuring everything out, and this is the truth. And it's like, no, you're funneling. There's a way you're looking. There's still a way of looking. There's still an imagination. There's still an archetype. There's still a lens. There's no such thing as like, this is pure perception. And it's like, I'm seeing things the way they really are.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Everyone's always in I think when you said, yeah, the waters that we're swimming in, it's like seeing, I think, and this is one of the things I think that makes it so difficult for people to grasp sometimes, because everyone's a fish in water and they have this sort of like imaginal way of being in the world. And it's almost like helping people see that around them.
So you're working on this course, this awakening course, with a bunch of other people whose work resonates with you. What are maybe like some of the challenges? Then this could be around the course. This can be around your teachings or just what you're doing. What are kind of some of the challenges or some of the questions that you're kind of grappling or living with right now that are most alive in your experience?
Yeah, there's so I'm making the course and also writing a book to try and sort of capture some of the most important things. And I think I've been lucky, because if someone said to me now, write a book from scratch, I'd be like, don't know where to start. But partially because of that fish in water thing, there's a sense of like, there's a level of presence that comes from awakening, where the place where you end up, it just feels very normal and very sort of like, oh, this is just what experience is. But luckily, I've kind of left a trail of breadcrumbs. So all the writing on my website is almost like things that came up along the way of like, oh, this is important, this is important, this is important. So it's almost more a sense of kind of like collating, revisiting all of that from here, like editing, collating, putting it together, getting lots of feedback from people about like what's actually helpful, and really trying to like distill that in a way that gets the important bits out in a way that is like meaningful, that actually helps people, that lands with people in a way that they can practice well and live well, and will hopefully kind of make a difference to the world. And then I think that feels like the main thing.
Yeah. I really appreciate this conversation, Rosa. We spoke about so much from your awakening journey, kind of challenging times and psychosis, power dynamics, hierarchy, questioning some of these traditional ideas of Buddhism, and, also unpacking your whole being awakening framework that you've been working on. I really appreciate this kind of inclusive perspective that you're giving and looking at making experience very nuanced. And also it feels like putting the power back into the practitioner, into the person, rather than an institution or a tradition or a lineage. So I just wanted to ask, I guess, is there anything you wish I would have asked, or is there anything you want to share before we wrap up?
No, I just want to say I feel very grateful. I've really appreciated the conversation. Just like lovely to talk with you. The questions have all been really nice, and to hear little bits of your perspective, and it's been great.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Rosa. Really appreciate you.
Cool.
All the best.
Thank you.